This is Plant-Based Briefing. Top 15 meat and dairy producers emit nearly as much methane as the entire EU, study finds, by Nicole Axworthy at vegnews.com. And I'm Marian Erickson, and this is the curated content plant-based podcast for people who want to keep up on the various reasons to live plant-based or vegan in a short amount of time. I curate and narrate, with permission, a variety of articles in about 10 minutes or less every weekday. Today's is from vegnews.com, the largest vegan media brand in the world. They have a best-selling magazine, and they create amazing content from food and fashion to travel, celebrity interviews, beauty and health info. They have a meal planner. They have tons of great resources and information on their website. And if you know anyone getting ready for a wedding, they have a new website called veganweddings.com. So now let's get to today's plant-based briefing. Top 15 meat and dairy producers emit nearly as much methane as the entire EU, study finds, by Nicole Axworthy at vegnews.com. A new report highlights the environmental impact of the biggest meat and dairy companies, their lack of action, and the need for stricter regulations in this sector. The methane emissions of 5 of the largest meat corporations and 10 of the largest dairy corporations is equal to more than 80% of the European Union's entire methane footprint, according to a new report from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy and the Changing Markets Foundation. The report, linked here, also estimates that the combined methane emissions of these 15 companies, which include JBS, Tyson, and the Dairy Farmers of America, exceed the methane footprint of countries including Russia, Canada, Australia, and Germany. The report says that individual companies' methane emissions are also comparable to countries' livestock-related methane emissions. For instance, methane emissions from JBS, the world's largest meat producer, exceed the combined livestock methane emissions of France, Germany, Canada, and New Zealand, and compare to 55% of U.S. livestock methane. Similarly, the Dairy Farmers of America, the company that contributes the most methane from dairy, produces emissions comparable to the UK's livestock emissions. And notably, the overall greenhouse gas or GHG emissions, including CO2, from the 15 companies exceed those of major oil companies such as ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, and its unique properties have led climate scientists to call for rapid cuts in methane this decade. Quote, "This would buy us valuable time to avoid dangerous climate tipping points and to give humanity a chance to stay under a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature increase, while societies act to transition to zero emissions," unquote, the report says. Why is animal-produced methane a problem? Methane from the meat and dairy industry is produced from manure and the digestion process of ruminants such as cows, sheep, and goats. Animal agriculture contributes 32% of the world's methane emissions, making it the single largest source of human-made methane emissions. Even if the world immediately stopped using all fossil fuels, scientists say that current emissions from the global food system would make it impossible to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and difficult even to realize the 2 degrees Celsius target. Experts say that cutting emissions from methane, which is relatively short-lived but has around 80 times more warming potential than carbon dioxide, is critical in preventing catastrophic climate change. In addition to methane, large-scale production and dispersal of manure from industrial pork, dairy, and beef production is highly polluting in other ways by contaminating soil, water, and air with nitrates and ammonia. Quote, "To tackle these emissions in a substantive manner, the number of animals in mass industrial systems of production must be dramatically reduced," unquote, the report says. Quote, "This is the most effective measure to reduce emissions from animals themselves and emissions from their manure," unquote. Meat and dairy corporations are responsible for massive quantities of methane emissions as they raise and slaughter millions of animals around the world. Yet, in spite of their enormous climate impact, meat and dairy companies continue to operate in a regulatory vacuum when it comes to reporting and reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. With the report's key findings in mind, the authors are calling for urgent and ambitious legislation to address the significant climate impacts of global meat and dairy corporations, and for governments to support a just transformation of industrial animal agriculture in an effort to reduce their impact on the environment. Quote, "Time is of the essence in cutting back methane this decade, yet policymakers have identified solutions that tinker around the edges of this extractive system of animal agriculture," unquote, the report says. Quote, "A comprehensive set of regulations is needed to ensure that the burden for emissions reduction rests on corporations that shape and drive the supply chain," unquote. Shifting to plant-based foods reduces environmental impact. This new report adds to a growing body of research that emphasizes the need for climate action within industrial animal agriculture and methane emissions reduction efforts. According to the latest report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, in order for the world to have any chance at reversing the climate crisis, methane emissions must be slashed by 33% by 2030. Although some areas of climate change mitigation have substantially decreased, the IPCC report, which was published earlier this year, explained that improvements in sectors such as agriculture and forestry are needed. Quote, "It's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius," unquote, PCC Working Group 3 co-chair Jim Skia previously said in a statement. Quote, "Without immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors, it will be impossible," unquote. Studies demonstrate that a shift to plant-based diets rich in pulses, nuts, fruits, and vegetables could also lead to substantial reduction of greenhouse gas emissions compared to current dietary patterns in most industrialized countries. Quote, "Where appropriate, a shift to diets with a higher share of plant protein, moderate intake of animal-sourced foods, and reduced intake of saturated fats could lead to substantial decreases in greenhouse gas emissions," unquote, the report states. Quote, "Benefits would also include reduced land occupation and nutrient losses to the surrounding environment, while at the same time providing health benefits and reducing mortality from diet-related non-communicable diseases," unquote. You just listened to Top 15 Meat and Dairy Producers Emit Nearly as Much Methane as the Entire EU, Study Finds, by Nicole Axworthy at veganpodcast.com. And I'm your host, Marian Erickson. And here's more evidence about the benefits of a plant-based diet on the environment. As Joseph Poor from Oxford University has said, quote, "A vegan diet is probably the single biggest way to reduce your impact on planet Earth. Not just greenhouse gases, but global acidification, eutrophication, land and water use. It is far bigger than cutting down on your flights or buying an electric car," unquote. So please share this episode with anyone who might benefit and encourage those around you to live vegan. Thanks for listening.